My name is Dominic Carter, and I've worked as a volunteer coordinator at the Riverside Community Foundation for 3 years. What happened that Tuesday in March completely changed my perception of human connection and myself. In 5 minutes of a public demonstration, I discovered a side of my personality I never knew I had. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like to get access to more stories like this. I woke up at 6:30 in the morning, just like always. My one-bedroom apartment is only a 10-minute walk from the community center, a convenience I purposely chose when I moved to this small town 4 years ago. At 28, my life followed an organized, predictable routine, exactly how I liked it after years of college uncertainty and a few relationships that ended without much drama. I drank my black coffee while checking the day's schedule on my tablet. Tuesday meant preparations for our monthly community education series, and today was special, a police K-9 demonstration. I'd personally organized this partnership with the local department, believing that bringing the community closer to public services would strengthen our mutual support network. I got to the center at 7:30 on the dot. The 2-story building still held the morning silence, broken only by the echo of my footsteps on the waxed hallway floor. The characteristic smell of fresh coffee mixed with cleaning supplies greeted me, along with the natural light streaming in through the large windows facing the municipal park. It was my sanctuary, the place where I knew exactly who I was and what my purpose was. I spent the first 2 hours checking details of the weekly schedule, answering coordination emails, and organizing materials for the 10:30 demonstration. Our auditorium seated 50 people, but I was expecting about 30, an ideal number for close interaction without losing control of the situation. What you hear here is only the beginning. The full, uncensored stories with all the details you can imagine are available now. See the link in the description right now. At 10:15, I was arranging the last chairs when I heard something that made my stomach clench with an inexplicable anticipation. Firm, deliberate footsteps echoed down the hall, different from the hurried or hesitant steps of usual visitors. These were the steps of someone who knew exactly where they were going and what they were there to do. The auditorium door opened with controlled authority, and my first reaction was a wave of heat that rose from my chest to my face. A tall man in a police uniform entered, accompanied by the most impressive German shepherd I had ever seen. It wasn't just his height, about 6'2", or his broad shoulders that perfectly filled the navy blue uniform. It was his presence. He commanded the space simply by existing in it. "You must be Dominic," he said in a deep voice that resonated through the empty room. "I'm Officer Hayes, and this is Apollo." I swallowed hard before answering. "Dominic Carter, yes. It's a pleasure to meet you, Officer Hayes." His blue eyes studied me for a second that felt much longer. Apollo remained perfectly still at his left side, a living demonstration of discipline and training that immediately impressed me. I had worked with many volunteers over the years, but I had never seen this level of harmony between a person and an animal. "You can call me Oliver when we're not in an official capacity," he said, and something about the way he made that distinction deeply intrigued me. We spent the next 20 minutes setting up the space for the demo. Oliver explained the procedures he would present: substance searches, basic obedience commands, tracking techniques, and finally, body search protocols used when dogs indicate suspicion on a person. "That last part requires a volunteer from the audience," he explained while testing the sound system. "It needs to be someone comfortable with physical contact, because I demonstrate the actual procedures we use in the field." My heart sped up for no apparent reason. "Got it. We usually have people willing to participate." "Great. It's important that it's someone who can follow precise instructions and stay calm during the procedure." The way he said, "follow precise instructions," made something stir in my stomach. There was a natural authority in his voice that went far beyond his professional position. It was something intrinsic, as if he was born to command and lead. While he was adjusting equipment, I took the opportunity to watch him work. Every movement was economical and purposeful. His hands, large, with long fingers and a small scar on the back of his right one, manipulated objects with technical precision. When he bent down to check something on Apollo's collar, I could see the defined muscles of his back under the uniform. "How long have you been in the K-9 unit?" I asked, genuinely curious. 5 years with Apollo specifically. 8 years with the department." He straightened up and looked me directly in the eyes. "What about you? How long have you been a volunteer coordinator here?" 3 years. I came here after college, looking to make a real difference in the community." "I admire that," he said, and the tone was sincere. "A lot of people talk about serving others, but few actually do it." There was a moment of genuine connection there, a mutual understanding about dedication to public service. But there was something more, a subtle tension I couldn't quite name. At 10:25, people started to arrive. Families with curious kids, some regular seniors from the center, teenagers in small groups. I moved through the audience, greeting familiar faces and introducing new visitors to the program. But I was completely aware of Oliver's presence as he prepared for the demonstration. When I returned to the front of the auditorium, he had adopted a completely professional demeanor. The relaxed Oliver of the past 20 minutes had transformed into Officer Hayes, ultimate authority, total control, a commanding presence that naturally silenced scattered conversations. "Good morning," he began, his voice effortlessly projecting throughout the space. "I'm Officer Oliver Hayes from the local department's K-9 unit, and this is my partner, Apollo. Today we're going to demonstrate how we work together to keep our community safe." I stood on the side, observing both the presentation and the audience's reactions. Oliver had a natural gift for public education. He explained complex procedures in accessible language, keeping the kids interested while providing substantive information for the adults. Apollo performed a series of commands that drew spontaneous applause. He found hidden objects, obeyed hand signals, and demonstrated how he would indicate the presence of suspicious substances. Their partnership was impressive. Years of training and mutual trust transformed into an almost choreographed performance. "Now we'll move on to the final part of the demonstration," Oliver announced after 20 minutes of a flawless presentation. "When Apollo indicates suspicion on a specific person, we follow strict body search protocols. These procedures are standardized to ensure both the officer's safety and the citizen's rights." My heart rate spiked. I knew what was coming next. "I need a volunteer who is comfortable with a professional physical contact demonstration," he continued, his eyes scanning the audience. "I'll remind you that this is an educational situation, following the exact same protocols we use in the field." Several people looked around hesitantly. Some teenagers laughed nervously. Two mothers exchanged worried glances. That's when Oliver's eyes met mine on the side of the auditorium. There was a second of silent communication. Question and answer, challenge and acceptance. I raised my hand. "We have a volunteer," he said, and something in his tone had subtly changed. "Please come up here." I walked to the front, feeling all the audience's eyes on me, but strangely, I didn't feel exposed or embarrassed. There was a sense of purpose, as if this moment had been inevitable from the instant Oliver walked into the auditorium. "What's your name?" he asked loudly for the audience. "Dominic Carter. Thank you for volunteering, Dominic. I'll explain each step of the procedure as I demonstrate. First, I need you to stand with your back to the audience, facing the wall." I obeyed immediately, surprising myself with the naturalness of my response. I felt Oliver approaching from behind, his physical presence changing the temperature around me. "Place your palms on the wall, feet shoulder-width apart," he instructed, his voice now close enough that I could feel his breath on my neck. The moment was just beginning, but I already knew it would be transformative. There was something about the combination of his authority, the vulnerability of my position, and the acute awareness of the 30 pairs of eyes watching that created a completely new intensity in my experience. Oliver began to explain the legal and practical fundamentals of a body search to the audience, but his words became a distant background sound. All my attention was focused on the proximity of his body behind mine, on the anticipation of the contact that was about to happen. "The procedure always starts with the upper body," he said, addressing the crowd. "We systematically check the shoulders, arms, and torso." I felt his hands rest on my shoulders, firm, secure, professional. But there was something beyond the technique, a particular attention in the way his fingers pressed lightly before beginning the downward motion. In that moment, with 30 people watching an educational demonstration, I was experiencing something deeply intimate and personal. And from the way Oliver's breathing had changed almost imperceptibly behind me, I suspected he was feeling the same thing. If you've ever felt that instant connection with someone in a completely unexpected situation, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories that will surprise you. Oliver's hands began to move over my shoulders with a precision that went far beyond the merely professional. Each finger seemed to be mapping exactly where it was touching, pressing lightly through the fabric of my light blue dress shirt. "We always start by checking the shoulders and upper arms," he explained to the audience. But his voice had taken on a deeper, more controlled quality. "We're looking for objects that might be hidden in the folds of clothing or attached to the body." His palms slid down my arms, from my shoulders to my wrists, in a fluid motion that made my skin tingle under the shirt. I felt every inch of the path, the constant and methodical pressure checking sleeves, pockets, and possible hiding spots. "Raise your arms slightly," he instructed. and I obeyed without hesitation. Oliver circled my raised arms, his hands exploring the armpit area and my ribs. The proximity was intense. I could feel the heat emanating from his chest when he leaned in to better reach certain areas. "Now we're going to check the torso," he announced, positioning himself directly behind me. His hands rested on my back, at shoulder height, and began a slow, systematic descent. His fingers pressed against each vertebra through the fabric, as if he were memorizing the curve of my spine. When he reached my waist, his palms opened completely against my back, covering a larger area as he checked my lower back. My breathing was getting deeper, and I knew he noticed. There was something hypnotic in the way he conducted the procedure. Absolute authority combined with an almost reverent attention to detail. "Checking the waistline," he said, his hands circling my waist completely. I felt his fingers slide along the edge of my belt, checking for spaces where small objects could be hidden. The intimacy of the gesture, even though it was part of an official protocol, made me swallow hard. "Now, I need to check the front of the torso," he explained to the audience. "Dominic, you can turn to face the wall and put your hands at chest level." I positioned myself as instructed, now in profile to the crowd. Oliver approached my right side, and for the first time during the procedure I could see his face. His blue eyes were focused, professional, but there was an intensity there that went beyond police technique. His hands rested on my chest, over my shirt. He started near my heart. I could feel my accelerated pulse against his palm, and moved systematically across my torso. Every movement was precise, but there was a deliberate slowness that wasn't necessarily required by protocol. "We check the ribs, the sternum area, any area where objects might be attached to the body," he explained, his hands moving down toward my abdomen. When his palms pressed against my stomach, I involuntarily tensed my muscles. Oliver paused for a fraction of a second, so brief that probably only I noticed, before continuing with the same methodical precision. "The next step is checking the lower limbs," he announced, stepping back slightly. "Dominic, return to the previous position, hands on the wall, feet apart." I returned to my original position, with my back to the audience, and felt Oliver kneel behind me. The change in dynamic was immediate and intense. He was now in a position of even greater control, while I remained exposed and vulnerable before the spectators. His hands rested on my ankles, over the fabric of my black dress pants. Slowly, he began to move up my legs, explaining each step to the crowd while his fingers pressed and checked every inch. "Checking the legs follows the same systematic pattern," he said, his hands now at the height of my calves. "We're looking for objects that might be attached to the legs or hidden in pockets or folds." The pressure of his palms against my thighs made me close my eyes for an instant. There was something deeply primal in the sensation of being so thoroughly examined, under the command of someone who radiated competence and authority. "The thigh area requires special attention," he continued, his hands now very close to the most intimate part of my body. "Many small objects can be hidden in this area." I felt his palms press against the inside of my thighs, systematically checking every possible area. My breathing was clearly altered now, and I was sure at least part of the audience noticed. Oliver slowly stood up, positioning himself again behind me for the final phase of the procedure. "The last check is the posterior waist and hips," he explained, his hands resting on my waist from behind. This time, his fingers slid along the edge of my pants, checking the spaces between the fabric and my skin. The intimacy was almost unbearable. Being touched so precisely and controlled while 30 people watched created a tension I had never experienced. "Procedure complete," he finally announced, taking a step back. "Dominic, you can turn around." When I turned to face him, our eyes met for a second, loaded with meaning. There was something there. Mutual recognition. A silent understanding that we had shared something that completely transcended the context of the demonstration. "Thank you very much for your cooperation," he said loudly for the audience, but his gaze remained fixed on mine for another moment before he turned to the crowd. I returned to my place on the side of the auditorium with slightly shaky legs. My shirt stuck lightly to my back from sweat, and I felt like everyone in the room could see exactly what those 5 minutes had done to me. Oliver continued the presentation for another 15 minutes, demonstrating other commands with Apollo and answering audience questions. But something had fundamentally changed in the atmosphere. I was hyper-aware of his presence, the way he moved, the tone of his voice when he answered questions. When the demonstration ended and people began to disperse, I stayed to organize chairs and collect materials, trying to process what had happened. My mind was in a turmoil, between the physical excitement still pulsating in my body and the rational attempt to understand the intensity of that experience. Oliver approached me while I was stacking the last chairs, Apollo walking calmly by his side. "You were an excellent volunteer," he said, and there was something different in his tone now that we were without an audience. Very responsive to commands. I stopped what I was doing and looked at him directly. It was educational. I learned a lot about police procedures. An almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of his mouth. "There's a lot more I can teach you if you're interested in continuing education." My heart rate spiked again. There was a clear double meaning in those words, but also a genuine question. He was testing the limits, checking if I had felt the same intensity he had. "What kind of education did you have in mind?" I asked, surprising myself with my own boldness. Oliver took a step closer, closing the space between us. "Well, we could discuss future partnerships between the department and your foundation. I have a few ideas that could benefit the community." A deliberate pause. "My apartment is 10 minutes from here. We could continue our conversation in a more private setting." The word private carried a specific weight. It wasn't just about logistics or convenience. It was about creating a space where we wouldn't have to maintain professional masks, where we could explore the tension that had developed during those 5 intense minutes. "That sounds very productive to me," I replied, trying to maintain a professional tone, but knowing we both perfectly understood the subtext. "Great," he said, starting to pack up his equipment. "Apollo stays at the department during my free time. Can I meet you in the parking lot in 5 minutes?" I nodded, feeling a mix of nervousness and anticipation run through my entire body. As we finished organizing the auditorium, my mind raced between the excitement for the possibility of what might happen and a slight apprehension about entering completely unknown territory. I had never been attracted to authority in this way before. I had never experienced the sensation of giving myself so completely to another person's command. And I had definitely never felt this kind of sexual chemistry developing in such a public, professional context. When Oliver left the auditorium to take Apollo back to the department, I was left alone for a few minutes to process the intensity of what had just happened. My skin was still tingling in the places he had touched me. My breathing was still slightly altered, and a primal part of my brain desperately craved more of that controlled submission. 10 minutes later, I walked toward the parking lot with my heart pounding in my chest, knowing I was about to cross a line that would completely change my understanding of myself and what I truly desired in terms of intimate connection. The parking lot was almost empty when I arrived. Just a few scattered cars under the afternoon sun, and in the back, leaning against a black Chevrolet Silverado parked near the exit, was Oliver. He had changed out of his uniform into a navy blue t-shirt and dark jeans, but his commanding presence remained unchanged. "Punctual," he said as I approached, a genuine smile replacing the professional expression of the last few minutes. "I like that. A volunteer coordinator habit," I replied, trying to sound casual despite my racing pulse. "Punctuality is key." He opened the passenger door for me, a courteous gesture that somehow carried the same gentle authority he had demonstrated during the procedure. When I got in the vehicle, I was immediately enveloped by his scent, a mix of men's soap, a light leather aroma from the seats, and something indefinably personal that made my stomach clench. "I live in a residential complex a few blocks from here," he explained as he started the engine. "Nothing too fancy, but it's private and quiet." The word private again loaded with meaning. During the short drive, we made superficially casual conversation about work, the city, common ground, and our public services. But there was a palpable undercurrent of tension. Every stoplight became a moment of acute awareness of our physical proximity. Every time he shifted gears, I noticed the precise movement of his large, competent hands. "This is it," he said, parking in front of a 3-story building with a modern, discreet architecture. "Second floor." We went up an external staircase in silence. His apartment was exactly as I had imagined. Clean, organized, functional. Simple but quality furniture, all in shades of gray and dark blue. No unnecessary decorations, but framed photographs showed Oliver in work situations with different dogs over the years. "Want something to drink?" he offered, heading to the open kitchen integrated into the living room. "Water is fine." He brought 2 glasses and sat on the couch, indicating the space next to him. When I sat down, I kept a respectful distance, but I could feel the heat emanating from his body. "So," he began, turning slightly to face me, "about those partnerships between the department and the foundation." His tone had changed. Still professional, but with a new intimacy that hadn't existed at the community center. I'm always open to collaborations that benefit the community, I replied, aware that we were navigating multiple layers of conversation simultaneously. Well, there are several areas where we could work together. A deliberate pause. Regular educational programs, personal safety training, maybe more. In-depth demonstrations of police procedures. The last phrase was said in a slightly lower, more intimate tone. More in-depth demonstrations? I asked, even though I knew exactly what he was referring to. Oliver leaned in slightly closer. Today was just a basic introduction. There's a lot more I can teach you about search procedures, containment techniques, and dynamics of authority and cooperation. My heart pounded. He was being direct without being explicit, offering exactly what a primal part of me had craved since his hands first touched my shoulders in the auditorium. That sounds very educational, I managed to say, my voice slightly hoarse. It is, he confirmed, his blue eyes studying my reaction with the same focused intensity he used at work. But it requires a more controlled environment. No distractions, no audience. Just instructor and student. The way he said student made something stir deep in my stomach. There was a promise there, a suggestion of dynamics that completely transcended the educational context. When would you have time for this kind of advanced instruction? I asked, surprising myself with my own courage. A slow smile formed in the corner of his mouth. How about now? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with possibilities. I knew that if I said yes, we would definitely be crossing the line between professional and personal, between an educational demonstration and intimate exploration. Now sounds perfect, I replied, feeling like I was jumping off a cliff. Oliver stood up with the same controlled, precise movement as always. Great. But first, I need to establish some basic rules. He stood in front of me, and I automatically lifted my face to look at him. The change in dynamic was instantaneous. He was taking a position of command, and I was naturally responding to his authority. This will be a real training session, he said, his voice taking on the professional tone I knew, but now laced with intimacy. You follow my instructions exactly as I give them. If at any point you want to stop, just say stop, and we will stop immediately. Understood? Understood, I confirmed, my breathing already changing in anticipation. Good. Now I can be much more thorough, he said, echoing the words he had whispered in the auditorium. Without an audience, without a limited official protocol, just the two of us, and complete procedures. He walked slowly around me, like a predator studying its prey, but in a way that made me feel valued, desired, not threatened. Stand up, he instructed. I obeyed immediately, and the ease of my response surprised me. There was something deeply satisfying in following his commands, in giving control to someone so competent and careful. First lesson? Proper positioning, he said, stopping in front of me. Feet shoulder-width apart, spine straight, eyes on me. I adjusted my posture as instructed, and I felt his approval in the way his eyes scanned my body. Much better. Now we're going to practice responsiveness to commands. What followed was a careful dance of power and submission. Oliver gave specific instructions about positioning, movement, even breathing, and I discovered a deep satisfaction in executing them perfectly. Each correctly followed command earned his expressed approval, a reinforcement system that made me crave more and more to please him. Excellent control, he murmured, after a particularly complex series of positions. You learn fast. The praise warmed me more than it should have. There was something addictive about the combination of his authority and approval, in the feeling of being carefully directed by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Now, he said, his voice taking on a deeper tone, we're going to practice much more detailed search procedures than were possible to demonstrate publicly. My heart rate spiked. I knew we were approaching the moment we had both been anticipating since we left the community center. Position against the wall, he instructed, indicating a wall in the room where there were no windows. Hands flat, feet apart. I positioned myself as instructed, feeling the smooth texture of the paint under my palms. The vulnerability of the position was even more intense here, in this private space, without the protection of the public situation. This time, Oliver said, approaching from behind, I can be truly thorough. His hands rested on my shoulders with the same precision as before, but now there was a deliberate slowness, a sensual attention that didn't need to be disguised. Each touch lasted longer, each movement explored more deeply. When his palms slid down my back, they pressed more firmly, mapping every muscle, every curve of my spine. It was no longer just a professional check. It was intimate exploration, disguised as an official procedure. Interesting physical response, he murmured against my neck when he noticed my altered breathing. Very receptive. His hands circled my waist, this time without the barrier of public protocols. His fingers slid under the hem of my shirt, touching my heated skin directly. "Oliver?" I whispered. Not exactly a complaint, but more an expression of surprise at the intensity of the sensation. "Shh," he said softly. "Just let me work." And I let him. I gave myself completely to that moment of controlled vulnerability, of benevolent authority, of careful but decisive exploration. I discovered there was a strange freedom in not making decisions, in simply responding to and obeying the instructions of someone I trusted, implicitly. When he finally stepped away, I was trembling slightly, not from cold or fear, but from an excitement I had never experienced before. "Procedure complete," he said, echoing the words from the auditorium, but now with a smile that was pure personal satisfaction. I turned to face him, and I saw the same intensity in his eyes that I felt. We had definitely crossed into new territory, for both him and me. "Now what?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Now," he said, taking another step closer, "we start the advanced lessons." In that moment, standing in his apartment, still processing the intensity of the last few minutes, I realized that some encounters truly change our perception of ourselves irreversibly. I always thought I was someone who needed to be in control of everything, who made decisions and directed situations. But there, I discovered a part of me that found deep freedom in completely trusting someone competent, in surrendering to the authority of someone who knew exactly how to lead me. Oliver had shown me that submission wasn't weakness. It was a different form of strength, the courage to be vulnerable with someone worthy of that trust. And by the way he was looking at me now, with a mix of desire, respect, and a promise of much more to come, I knew we were just beginning an exploration that would fundamentally change how I understood intimacy and connection. There was still so much to discover about this dynamic between us, about how to balance the intense personal attraction with our professional responsibilities. But in that moment, standing in his apartment with the promise of advanced lessons hanging between us, those concerns seemed like questions for the future. The present was about Oliver taking another step closer, about the anticipation of what would come next, about the certainty that I had found someone who could teach me things about myself that I didn't even know I needed to learn. What you hear here is only the beginning. The full, uncensored stories with all the details you can imagine are available now. See the link in the description right now. If you want to know how this intense story between Dominic and Oliver continued, and to find out if they managed to balance personal attraction with professional responsibilities, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episodes. In the comments, tell me, have you ever had a moment where a professional situation awakened something completely unexpected in you? Your experiences could be the inspiration for our next stories.